Dereck and for my refutation, I'll be responding to the claim, cultural diversity brings unity within a community. And for my opponent's secondary claims, first, he states, cultural diversity can make a positive impact in a community where there is unity. Second, globalization increases points of interaction and friction between cultures. And third, cultural diversity dictates a balanced representation of the different communities living together. So, starting with my opponent's first claim, once again, or my opponent's secondary first claim, is cultural diversity can make a positive impact in a community when there's unity. This statement is pretty broad, and that's one of the reasons why I'm refuting to it. And so, for this also it repeats the main claim. About the main claim, once again, is cultural diversity brings unity within a community. So it's really not advancing the main claim in any way. And the most he offers for this, the evidence my opponent states, is that cultural diversity can be found widely in the United States. And he talks about how you could buy Polish hot dogs at baseball games. So. But that doesn't really advance the claim. And further within this statement is that he says, however, there are many who oppose cultural diversity and believe in more conservative culture values. From this point, it's kind of confusing on which side he's exactly siding with or on. So it just confuses the audience on which side he's actually rooting for. And for a secondary claim, the second secondary claim is globalization increases points of interaction and friction between cultures. First off, it contradicts the main claim because he includes friction at the end, and he's trying to promote or say that cultural diversity brings unity, but by adding friction, he's implying also that there might be violence or conflict within these communities of diverse cultures. So, and he relates that globalization also promotes the human rights. And within one of his sources, by Diane Schechner, who writes for the UN, she states that within human rights, there is a numerous amount of concerns, including genocide, slavery, and torture, and racial discrimination. These are the things that he actually put within his speech, and it kind of negatively impacts his speech too, because he's admitting that within cultural diversity, it's not always unity that's a positive outcome. Well, that's a negative outcome, but that's what comes out of that, of a culture diverse community. So, and for the third secondary claim, he states that cultural diversity dictates a balanced representation of different communities living together. And for this, the wording is kind of weird with dictates, because usually dictates it sounds like it has a negative impact on it. And my question is, how does cultural diversity actually dictate a balanced representation? Because diversity doesn't necessarily mean that there's always going to be unity. For example, back then, for one of the Detroit riots, the Zoot riots, the 1992 riots, those are within the United States, and he stated that the United States is diverse, but at the same time we have conflicts within. So, and one specific one is that the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. This is basically in a nutshell where the UN actually gave Israel the land, but originally the Palestinians were there, so they actually moved them out of that area. So the conflict now is that the Palestinians kind of want that land back. It was originally called Palestine, but now it's called Israel. So they wanted this back, but then you would think this would be a cultural conflict, but it's more political, because the government doesn't want to the Israeli government doesn't want to actually give it back. They're just saying that it's their land because they're promised this land. And overall, to conclude this dispute, I think the argument is kind of misplaced in that not only that, like, of course, unity could be a good outcome with the cultural diversity, but most of the time, like when you put a group of people together, they don't necessarily actually make peace. So there's different variations of this. So I would just like to say that the advocate didn't do a well job of actually stating what exactly he wanted out of this and what side he was on. Thanks.
All right, you identified the claim and the secondary claims, I think probably a little bit more clearly than the advocate's original argument, so that helps give it a little bit more structure. Your signposting on the points as you go through them is okay. I like the idea that the first point is basically a circular argument. It's one of those things that begs the question where the first point is basically just the main proposition being repeated. I know that there was ambiguity in how the information is supposed to report that process, and I like the fact that you show that the second point presents this sort of reservation or difficulty in advancing that idea. On the second point, you labeled that point a lot more clearly, I think, than the advocate did. And your interpretation seems to be that, look, he's contradicting himself because he's arguing that this also results in friction, which might undermine the unity. So which is it that cultural diversity provides? Does it provide unity? Does it provide conflict? In essence, it sounds like an informative speech at this point, and you're having to take a position on it. I thought you did a reasonably good job trying to explain why the position is untenable for advancing any particular claim. The human rights issues that come up, you basically, just kind of go through that inventory, and clearly they exist, even though there's cultural diversity. So I'm not sure how they illustrate there's some benefit from diversity or unity of a diversity, and I think you're asking a good question there. The third point basically is a whole answer on this, or a whole question on this point. What is it exactly that the advocate's asking us to believe on this point? And I thought that you presented some good counter arguments with examples that you don't really provide much detail on. You just kind of assert about the Detroit riots and the Zoot Suit riots and the 92 riots. The idea that those are related to diversity, conflicts between groups of different cultures, I think needs to be demonstrated rather than just shown. The Israeli-Palestinian point, on the other hand, one that might seem to be easily believed to be a cultural difference, you kind of suggest, well, it's actually a political difference, which means that, in essence, you're arguing both sides on this point as well. So it was just not quite as clear as it needed to be on that point. I thought that you, at the end, were doing a little bit more evaluation of the argument than analysis of the argument and arguing what the problems were. You need to give us some kind of declarative claims about the argument per se, and just demonstrate that it's unclear as to what it is that's being asked of the audience by the end of the presentation, and it's unclear how any of the evidence that the advocate presented supports that particular presentation. I think if you simplified that last point to those kinds of claims, you'd have a stronger response. All right, thank you.